Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. COP26 is coming, how project managers influence sustainable development, with Rob Leslie-Carter, Director at Arup. I'm Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. You'll find yourselves on mute mode, but we're keen for your interaction. As you can see in the chat, we have Slido running during this presentation, so please visit slido.com and use the code COP26. Equally, Rob is happy to take your questions at the end, so please submit these in the main control panel, and time dependent, I'll put these to Rob. So I would personally like to say thank you to all the volunteers from the APM branches and the APM SIGs for all their efforts over the last 12 to 18 months in putting these webinars together, especially the APM Midlands Branch for engaging with Rob to make this happen. So Rob Leslie-Carter is a director with Arup with over 28 years experience. Rob, we're really looking forward to learning more about COP26, so over to you.
Great. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, Rob.
Fantastic. All right. Hello, everyone. Yep, my name's Rob Leslie-Carter. I work at Arup, but this is not a case study in Arup by any means. This is more of I guess, the desired outcomes are to just raise a bit of awareness in terms of what's going on out there in the industry at the moment, trying to raise ambition of our profession in terms of what we can be doing to think about sustainable development on our projects, and also just to use COP26 as an immovable deadline that's approaching that could galvanize us into a little bit of action. I think it's good just to find a way of bringing a bit of energy into all of our lives at the moment after a bit of a discombobulating year plus. So hopefully this will do the trick. I'm going to start off by giving a little bit of context about how my mindset works, and some of that's about the background I've had with Arup, focusing more and more on sustainable development in my project work, and then unpack a little bit about what net zero means, just so we're all using the same language and terminology, and then finish with this call to arms about COP26 and about raising the ambition in the profession in the build up to that event. We're going to try, this is the first attempt at getting some technology to work. We're going to try a couple of Slido questions. So I'm going to flick back to Rob Allen, who's going to take you through a couple of Slido questions. So hopefully you've already logged on to the Slido chat. Otherwise, you can see the QR code in here. Rob, I'll hand over to you just to give people instructions.
Please go to slido.com and then input the code COP26. So Rob, we're starting to get some results. So worrying is one of the words coming through at the moment. Future, concerning. So this is going to make a really cool, interesting word cloud, shall we say. So Rob, I don't know if you can see some of these answers coming through.
Yeah, no, it shows that it's at the forefront of people's minds. Some people are putting a few scared, that sort of thing. So so there's a lot of things there, and about urgency. Someone's put in future, so I'll talk about that and maybe challenge it a little bit. I think it's more of a sort of a pressing issue for today. I'm assuming the bigger ones are either the most recent or the ones that are being repeated a little bit. But yeah, global, uncertainty, worrying, time to act, absolutely. Relevant, yeah, it's great. We'll collect these and feed them back in some of the follow-ups to this presentation anyway. That was a warm-up, that one.
Perfect, thanks Rob. So we'll move on to the second question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where is your current confidence level for factoring sustainability in management of your project? So 1, sustainability what? Number 10, I'm leading COP 2016 brainstorming sessions with Greta. I love the way you put that, Rob. So we can see the answers coming through now. So it looks like the 4 score is leading. 3 to 4 seems to be the.
Yeah, I mean, and those are not surprising. I think that there's some people, and I'm not a sustainable development expert by any means, but I've started tuning into this a little bit more over the last 18 months or so. And there's some people that live and breathe sustainable development. and climate emergency biodiversity issues who are more confident with it. And there's an awful lot of us who can see something happening but haven't quite figured out how we're going to make it real in our project work. So hopefully over the course of the next 55 minutes we'll equip you to think about how you can attack some of these issues in your day job with a little bit more confidence. But yeah, that's a really good indication of where we are as a collective of practitioners and educators at the moment. So thank you for that.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. I'll pass back to yourself to get back into your slide deck.
Okay, we're there.
Perfect. I can see that, Rob. We move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Perfect.
So
I'll go back on mute.
Just a bit of context. So everything that I say is going to be through this slightly quirky Arup employee lens. I've worked for Arup for 28 years, so I know nothing else. So I'm a self-confirmed Arup tragic, and it does provide a bit of context into why my brain works the way that it does, and the resources that I have around me. So it's a place that I enjoy working. Arup actually had its 75th anniversary 2 weeks ago, set up by Ove Arup, who was an engineer, philosopher, who did two really prescient future-based things. First of all, he persuaded all the directors and partners at the time to donate the company, so it's effectively employee-owned. So it very much independent and can do the sort of work that it wants to do on the projects that it wants to work on with the clients that have a shared set of values. And he also laid down a very clear company culture through his key speech, which is captured on this slide. So just going through the headlines. The aims of the firm are just to do good work with a social purpose. The means are to get some good people together, a diverse membership, and just let them do what they want, give them the freedom to be creative and to learn. And hopefully the results that people that work there are happy, satisfied. The clients that we work with are happy, satisfied. But that virtual cycle is mainly driven by having satisfied members. One of the interesting things about working in a creative design organization is that there's a very strong future foresight research component to the work that we do, and I put links on all of these slides so that you can pick these out afterwards and have a bit of a look at it. But if any major consulting firm these days, and Arup's no exception, if you go and search under Arup publications, you'll see this great sort of wealth of thought leadership. Arup is mostly focused on the built environment, and that's interesting context actually, because the built environment is responsible for about 40% of the world's carbon emissions. So from a personal perspective, there's definitely an urgency into taking some personal responsibility in acting. But we realized about 3 years ago there was not a huge amount in terms of thought leadership around project management and professional services. So this is a little bit of an origin story for where we are today, thinking about project management and sustainable development. And it was the inspiration for us I was just working out today, it was almost 4 years ago now, it seems like no time at all ago, to produce the Future of Project Management publication, which is something we did in collaboration with APM and also with UCL Bartlett. And I call it the Green Book, and not going to talk about it in any detail today, but there's a link down at the bottom if you want to have a look at it. It's really kind of quick read for your virtual commute, very, very easy to digest. The outcome that we really wanted to achieve from Future of Project Management was to create another virtuous cycle. So as you go around the clock, we presented it to probably about 5,000 people in total, mostly focused on students, people that were about to choose their research and dissertation topics, trying to inspire future project management mindsets and spark new research ideas. And that was really effective. So that had lots of input into briefing people and taking part in people's research and dissertation topics, which I hope has put them in a better place. Really big initiatives like responsible project management sort of came out and were partly inspired by some of this work. And the book covered a number of topics. There were 7 in total, a real mixture of people, human factors, and technology. And APM actually used these 7 topics in one of their salary surveys. It was a bit of an annex to the salary survey questions. We said, what do you think are the most relevant drivers for change in the way you deliver your projects? And the one that came out on top by miles, and the one that people always tend to ask questions about was changing corporate culture. So the social and environmental agenda that was forcing fundamental changes in the way we deliver our projects and our business strategies, and the future scenarios presented in the book. Imagine a future where social responsibility dominates the corporate agenda, and companies, project management firms, projects develop this powerful social conscience and sense of responsibility, and also consumers, customers, stakeholders demand ethics and environmental credentials as a top priority. So, society and businesses see their agendas align. And the fact that this was getting so much traction and generating so much interest really made me think a little bit more detail about what the ethical considerations are that we need to make as project management professionals around the delivery of our project work. Now, we're governed by a code of professional conduct, and this is the, what the front cover of the APM code of professional conduct looks like. I imagine the majority of people here haven't dived into it in any detail, but it's a good read. And I started realizing that codes of conduct generally across professional organizations, and APM's no real exception, they're all about doing things right. It's the way you conduct yourself, no matter what the enterprise, no matter what the project that you're given. It's about executing things in the right way. And very, very little is spoken about doing the right things in the first place. And even the most devoted and experienced project managers can be fundamentally irresponsible in three significant ways. They can be politically irresponsible, so not knowing what's happening, not knowing the context of the projects that you're operating in, and normally on projects that's the needs and requirements of a particular group of stakeholders being prioritized over the needs and requirements of other stakeholders. And I guess an interesting example recently would be something like Heathrow third runway. So, Court of Appeal finds that the approval of that runway was illegal because it failed to take into account commitments under the 2015 Paris Agreement, for example, which requires a climate budget to be set to keep global temperature rises at close to 1.5 degrees. So that's a really quite a technical example of political irresponsibility at a project level. The second one is intellectual responsibility. So not knowing any different, or the decisions and the actions we take on our projects being susceptible to this is the way we do things around here. It's the only way we do things around here. And it's probably compounded a little bit by the generational leadership that we still have in our organizations and our projects. Tend to be people from older generations who are maybe a little bit more stuck in their ways. I'm generalizing massively. But it definitely calls for a little bit of intellectual disobedience to find a way to carry on changing and prodding for change on our projects. And the third type is moral irresponsibility, which I hope doesn't happen so often, which is just not knowing the difference between right and wrong. And I guess you sometimes see it when people providing professional project management services commodify their skills. But all of these things are increasingly important in a world where our own individual reputations are becoming increasingly important. So I might commonly ask, in summary of all this, why would anyone want to be project managed by you? And this is a bit of a segue into talking about sustainable development. If you look at this slide, this is an old homepage from a website, and if I was to ask you whose strapline is that, some of you would probably intuitively guess that's Arup's strapline, and correct, it is. We Shape a Better World has been Arup's strapline for the last 15 years or so, and actually as I go around from different people's offices around the world, I see very similar straplines used all over the place. I think I walked into Bouygues office in Paris and they had We Shape a Better World written across the wall in their reception. And it's actually a little bit vague, We Shape a Better World. What does it mean? And a classic example is in Australia, for example, there's an an understanding amongst the staff that they're not going to work on casino projects because the economic divide in Australia is really strained due to gambling issues, and casino projects are seen as over the line that the staff are prepared to get involved with. But if I was to say the same thing to some of my colleagues in other parts of the world, they'd be talking about how they are, really affecting positive change from within. They're designing some of the most sustainable casino projects in the world. So, it's very, very contextual, this idea of what does better mean. And recognizing this about 2 years ago, Arup defined better more specifically through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And some of you will be familiar with these. If not, there's a link in the slide. Really recommend you have a look at these and let the detail wash over you a little bit. That they're a framework that every country in the United Nations bought into at about 5 million consultees, including some of my colleagues, provide us with a really interesting lens that we can challenge, frame and refine the projects that we work on and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve on our projects. So they're very, very broad. There is some focus on infrastructure, but there's also a much broader focus on societal and planetary outcomes. And really interesting, the need for partnerships. So they provide this excellent overall balance, and they're definitely the starting point for making some stronger commitments, particularly to Arup, with regard to climate emergency and more recently achieving net zero carbon emissions. Okay, so like I say, really worth having a look at this in a bit more detail if it's not something that you're familiar with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project pathway to net zero, and for me, I first became more aware of it when the Committee on Climate Change published their net zero report, talking about the roadmap for the UK achieving net zero outcomes. So Climate Change Committee, or CCC, they're a statutory body that was set up under the Climate Change Act, and their purpose is to advise the UK and the devolved governments on emissions targets and report to Parliament on progress, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Really, really interesting source of bleeding edge material. I've put also in the bottom of this slide the Twitter handle of Chris Stark, who's their chief executive. Really, really interesting guy, great communicator, and thoroughly recommend that you follow him just to stay abreast of breaking news in the climate emergency and increasingly in the COP26 area as well. In that net zero report, they also issue this really interesting roadmap for the major projects and programs to deliver net zero. And I look at this and my mouth starts watering in terms of look at this incredible amount of activity that's going to be happening over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And the net zero report sets out this portfolio of projects that we need to deliver to get to net zero by 2050. And it's a combination of using known technologies that we'll be familiar with, but scaling them up alongside some real step changes and improvements to the quality of life. So it talks about delivering energy to consumers in net zero carbon forms, hydrogen, hot water and heat networks, etc. Also the choices about how people travel, what we eat, the best use of the UK's land. So it's a really interesting thing to read, and really, really relevant to project managers in particular, because it's not just about sustained rollout of carbon technologies and infrastructure. It's also about managing people and societal change. I picked this graph out of the report because it's a really interesting element for project managers. It's if you go around the pie chart, it's showing that 60% of emissions reductions involve some sort of societal and behavioural change where we need to find a way to engage the public in that challenge. And I always see project managers as enablers to create the conditions to deliver net zero projects. We're very much the integrators in a lot of the work we do. So it's a great opportunity. It's not just rolling out low carbon technologies. It's a far more systemic challenge that we all face. And you can look at the challenge in two different ways. You can look at it as moral obligation, and I think there's a good shout to say that there is a moral obligation, particularly, as I said earlier, if you're involved in the built environment and you know that your sector is responsible for so large a proportion of global emissions. But you can also think of it in terms of it being a business imperative. If that's more of a driver to you, or if that's something that you can articulate to your clients, your staff, your stakeholders, whatever it might be, that the funding or the investment required annually to come from governments to deliver this is about $5 to $7 trillion. I think I worked out that the UK's investment over the next 30 years is going to be the equivalent of delivering about 20 high-speed twos in parallel. So delivering one is really bloody difficult. So you can imagine delivering 20. Just the scale of the opportunity, and so much broader set of skills and programs and project types. And we're already seeing lots of change in many sectors. You'll recognise energy, pension funds, banks, new policy relations and standards that are starting to drive a change in our practice. And society's expectations are also changing. So, a shift from creating shareholder value to creating value for both business and society. So I kind of use this graph to show that focusing on sustainable development, sustainable futures will bring us as a profession closer to our clients, and a real opportunity to form uncommon collaborations with new partners. And hopefully it'll be exciting, it'll be a challenge intellectually, and allow us to expand our skills. So this was the call to arms for me and for many others too. And then if we go back to 2019, this image has always really caught my imagination. The Extinction Rebellion movement began to, in particular, have a real influential voice. And people on this call who are based in London will remember in April 2019, a couple of years ago, London was essentially brought to a standstill. And a lot was happening at that time. The next month, in May 2019, Climate Change Committee issued its net zero recommendations, and the month after that, in June, the UK government became the first major country to legislate for a net zero target in carbon emissions by 2050. So there was an awful lot happening. The Heathrow third runway position was challenged 6 months after that. So this mood of bottom-up action was really being captured, which was really quite exciting. And soon after that, we set up Project Managers Declare, which is a global petition advocating for accelerated change around climate and biodiversity emergency. It sets out a really simple set of commitments around that will strive to increase awareness and advocacy around climate and biodiversity emergency, delivery principles for our projects, and again, a real emphasis on collaboration and sharing outcomes as transparently as possible. Like, this is too big a thing for us to do individually or within our cliques. It's something that we have to do as a collective as far as we can. And Project Managers Declare is part of a suite of aligned petitions under the overall banner of Construction Declares. So some of you will be signatories to Architects Declared, Civil Engineers Declared, etc. And there's also a whole range of other spin-offs like Musicians Declare. So a whole range of industries are using this as a way of pooling the voice of an individual profession. And the thing that Project Managers Declare differentiates itself from the others a little bit, and the bit that really interested me was the broader influence that we can have on projects as integrators and enablers. Because just thinking about our own carbon emissions on our way to work and our behaviour as individuals is really just the very tip of the iceberg compared to the influence we can have on the projects that we all collectively work on. If we can get that bit right, if we can make sure that every single project we're delivering is sort of has that raised sustainable development ambition, then we can make some real change. And I'm hoping that some of you will be inspired to sign up for Project Managers Declare on the back of today. There's 43 signatories today. So many thousands of project management practitioners and educators in there. I think generally, if I compare this to the Architects Declare petition, there's over 1,000 signatories to the Architects Declare petition. And I think we are a bit shy as project management professionals. And I'll come on to why I think that is. But please, if you feel that you're your firm or your private company is not represented on here and could be, go and have a look at UK Project Managers Declare. Go and have a look at the commitments that you'll make, and it's a very simple thing just to click a button and sign up. But it'd be really good. The idea is that we'll be sitting around the tables with our clients and our project teams, and a lot of people sitting around the table will be signatories to one of the Declare's petitions. So there'll be a real sort of force for change, and it'll almost be taken for granted that everyone's going to have a fairly aligned set of ambitions. One of the reasons I think we're quite shy as project management practitioners and educators is a slight nervousness about how we can influence things. A slide that I've used before is looking at the various different levels of project management interaction, and to try and get around that common project management profession of what can I do. And again, you can, I guess, almost take it for granted that I'm going to say that we're going to have a more central role, but hopefully this diagram helps you think about whatever your role might be on any sort of project of any sort of size, that you can find something that you can draw some inspiration from. So this is just a very typical project governance structure, just to introduce some thoughts about how we can influence net zero, from the funding and approvals level to the strategic direction around the project board, operational direction, and down there at the bottom, project delivery. And every single one of these is an opportunity for us to engage, influence, do things differently, nudge, ask questions, be curious, whatever it might be. So, selecting your projects and your clients, and maybe this is even selecting the people you want to work with, really seeing this prominently in early careers, kind of graduates and apprentices coming to the industry at the moment. They're really looking at a reason why they should join particular firms. So you can think about looking at that left-hand column. Is the project that you're thinking about getting involved with, is it aligned with the Paris Agreement? Do our clients or our clients' funders have a sustainability framework? Have they made some commitments themselves that show that the whole project system is going to be aligned with the Paris Agreement? Is our role something that's influential? Can we have a discussion about where we can possibly be more influential or be included in some broader conversations and show that we want to add more value to that conversation? Making those part of your go, no go decisions around the projects you want to work with is really important. And this is the first sort of deep breath we need to take as a profession. We need to start prioritizing the right projects at the expense of doing projects that aren't aligned with the Paris Agreement. I know it's really difficult, and that's often where people sort of come unstuck, but this is one of the first things we need to do. So if we look at influencing strategic direction, just hopefully some things that will ring some bells. We can encourage net zero requirements to be part of the project vision or the blueprint. We can, quite often we might be helping to author or be consulted on the project requirements, and we can make sure that they're aligned with net zero. We can share emerging best practice and innovation. So, we might have a colleague working on an amazing project that our particular client could benefit from. So it might be a case of just sharing some best practice, or bringing in a former client, what we might call a reach back event, kind of say, look, this worked really well on this project. Let's just get together and talk through some of the logistics and some of the issues, some of the blockers. So we try and normalize some of these things as much as possible. And can we include net zero targets in project board governance and approvals? And we're already seeing this. Some previous business cases which were far more financially driven and now starting to include a lot more metrics around social value and sustainable development. So it's already starting, but we can see that us as project managers can start trying to influence and nudge our clients, or whatever it might be, our project teams, into that sort of right direction. At an operational level, it's got to work as a system. So the whole supply chain has got to have a similar set of net zero requirements, and there needs to be no gaps. So in the same way you might do with any sort of scope document, can I map out a clear set of roles and responsibilities against each one of those requirements, so we know who's responsible and accountable for achieving those sustainable development outcomes? And people start to behave differently when they get measured in certain ways. So are there some key performance indicators we can set up that are aligned with those net zero objectives? And in project delivery level, making sure the scopes and the contracts are all aligned. And again, that's a classic blocker with anything. It could be the way we implement digital transformation or BIM or whatever it might be, but getting the contracts and the scopes properly lined up is a simple thing to get right. Making sure we report progress against those requirements, and again, just sharing. Be generous. Don't hoard your good work. Just anything you're doing that you can share. Make sure you get it out there on as open source a basis as you possibly can. In terms of an implementation plan, this is just something I've stolen from an Arup document, but it does provide a simple framework for you to think about how you might make a step change in your projects or within your organizations. So if I start down in the bottom left, learning and upskilling ourselves is an obvious first step, and webinars like this are hopefully something that are going to help in that learning and development and sparking a bit of curiosity that you can go and do some research yourselves. So yeah, it's formal learning and development, is research, it's sort of thinking a little bit more into the future in terms of how you see your project teams or your business developing. Then there's a lot of very simple things we can do in terms of enabling, the types of people we engage with, the people and culture, the messages we give out as leaders on our projects about what's important and what our priorities are. And also, a very project management-y type thing, the systems and procedures that we require people to go through. And it might be having sustainable development as an agenda item on an inception meeting that you might have at the beginning of a project, just to make sure it's part of the conversation. There's a whole realm of systems and procedures that you can implement, from choosing what projects you want to work on to how you share best practice at the end. How we act on the projects we deliver, the markets we work in, the services we provide, the changes that we're investing in terms of digital transformation. And then at the bottom right, hopefully we can all then start to influence, not just from within with our own colleagues and our own teams, but hopefully we can be increasingly influential as a professional body as well, to government, to other clients, to whatever it might be. And that's advocacy, commitments, thought leaderships, partnerships, clients. Again, a way of doing that is to take a look at something like Project Managers Declare and sort of think, can I make that commitment? Can that demonstrate the space that I'm in and the direction that we're trying to travel? It's very much a matter of some urgency. So a lot of people, when they think about sustainable development, they treat it like a tidal wave that's going to hit them at some stage in the future. And all they need to do is kind of clench their stomach muscles and just brace. But the future is something that we are shaping now, and something that don't ask the question, what will the future bring? It's like, how can we create a future that suits our profession? So we've all got some real agency in this. This timeline here is something that's adapted from the London Energy Transformation Initiative, or LETI. It's another link down in the bottom of the slide. So LETI, along with organisations like the World Green Building Council, have modelled that to get to where we need to be by 2050, we need to set targets on new projects that we're delivering and are coming into operation, that they all have to be operating at net zero by 2030. And that all of our new buildings need to be targeting net zero by 2025. So this slide sort of shows, we need to start increasing the number of net zero enabled projects that we're delivering now. And like I say, 2025 is not very far away. 3 to 4 years away, all of our new projects need to be targeting net zero. We need to start making that transition now, because following on from that, increasingly we then need our projects that we're delivering to be achieving net zero. So again, this is the bulk of the iceberg. So this is the influence that we're having on the projects that we're delivering. And there's a couple of hundred people or so maybe on this call today, and probably between us we're delivering a few thousand projects, formal projects across our work. And you can, if we're all trying to achieve the same sorts of things on the projects we're working on, like I say, we can make a real difference, which is great. So I'm going to finish off talking a little bit about COP26 and allow a little bit of time for some questions. So the UK is hosting COP26 this year. It's the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. Conference of the Parties is COP. It's the 26th, hence COP26. It's in the first 2 weeks of November. So still 6 months away. It brings countries together to agree coordinated action to tackle climate change. So it's the most important global meeting ever to take place on UK soil, and it's essentially there to ensure that countries are delivering to the Paris Agreement pledges. So people kind of say, what's the purpose of it? The one key purpose is implement the Paris Agreement. Okay, so the global plan to drive greenhouse emissions to an average of zero or net zero to stabilise the climate. And the event itself is it's like MIPIM or any major conference really. It's lots of sort of stall holders. They've got a blue zone, which is where the sort of the UN managed space happens, where delegations from 197 countries come together to share their stories. So the blue zone is the more formal area. And then there's a green zone that the UK government is managing, which is a platform for the general public, youth groups, civil society, whatever it might be, to have their voices heard through events. And people were applying in mid-March to be part of that green zone. I think APM have submitted an application to be part of that green zone, although I'm not 100% sure what form that's taking, but that'd be great if APM are represented there. But that's the thing. My message is really about what can we do between now and then to raise ambition in the build up to COP26. So use COP26 as something that's going to happen, and what can we do in the 6 months before it to, as I say, just raise awareness of sustainable development, the climate emergency, and the impact that project management as a profession can have. So just as a prompt, if you think of the themes of COP26, this is what they are. So energy transitions, and that could be anything from the commitments that the Scottish government's making to energy transitions on an individual dwelling. It's at all sort of scales. Major focus on the development of zero carbon and low carbon transport. So that's not just about electric vehicles, although that'll be part of it, obviously, but it might also be about thinking about that overall system of how, for example, high-speed rail might take cars off the road. It might provide an alternate to short-haul flights, whatever it might be. So again, really looking at that sort of system of low-carbon transport. Climate-ready, livable cities, a huge amount in there around digital transformation and organisational human behaviour that's going to affect the way we live in the future. Designing nature-based solutions and resilience and adaptation to shocks. So there's various fields of play or opportunities as I see them for the profession. So some of these might prompt a few ideas for you. So first of all, how can we deepen our relationships and our influence and build credibility with people we want to engage with? They might be clients, they might be colleagues, it might be different departments in our organisation. It's an opportunity for us to get engaged now. Can we collaborate through joint events and communications, your own joint events and communications, not waiting for APM, PMI, whoever it might be, to set something up that we can take part of? This is very much an opportunity to think, okay, well, what can I do in my own organisation, in my own project team? So contributing meaningfully to initiatives that are driving systemic change, that might be signing up to petitions like Project Managers Declare. It might be making some other commitments. It might be attending a few activities or taking part and contributing to some communiques. I know there's quite a lot of conversations going on at the moment, for example, about submitting calls for evidence, where different professions are going out to their members to sort of say, where are you at? What are some good case studies? So look out for those calls for evidence and participate, communicate. It'd be great if we can accelerate action by the profession. And there are conversations going on with APM and PMI at the moment about their own programs of events, and they're a really important medium, I think, for sort of accelerating best practice for the project management profession. You can make a commitment. You can make your own commitment corporately. You can sign up to Project Managers Declare. You can set your own net zero targets. validated by Science Based Target Initiative or the Race to Zero, whatever it might be. You know, they're small things, but they send a very, very clear message that you are committed to change. And I've got a few ideas about raising ambition in your own programs and projects. And again, these are just ideas that are out there just to try and make you think about some agency that you have to do some stuff. Okay, so the first one was an idea about the 6 carbon budget. So back in December, the Committee on Climate Change issued the 6 carbon budget, which is basically talks about the roadmap that we need to get to between now and the mid-2030s to limit our carbon emissions to a certain budget, hence the carbon budget. And this is all required under the Climate Act. So I had this sort of idea of okay, well, how are our projects contributing to the 6 carbon budget, or how aligned are they to that roadmap? So this is just an example that I put together in a couple of hours about a project I'm working on. It's an energy from waste plant in North London, actually, but the information in here is slightly hypothetical, but it's the North London Heat and Power project. And so, okay, what are the key relevant sectors that this project mirrors from the 6 carbon budget? In this case, I chose waste and buildings. And the 6 carbon budget is written in such a way that it's split into different sectors. So if you go into the waste sector, the pathway talks about reduction in waste sector emissions, great. Also talks about, you know, some very specific things, that all new energy from waste plants should be built with carbon capture or be carbon capture and storage ready. It talks about policy, banning biodegradable landfilling by 2025, increasing recycling rates by 70% by 2030, as well as advocating lower carbon choices to reduce waste and all those sorts of things. And in a building sense, the bottom bullet point here, no new gas boilers should be installed in existing homes beyond 2033. So all things that you might be aware of, but it's good to see them set out in the 6 carbon budget sector pathways. And on the right hand side, I sort of just was showing how the project is responding to those, not in a PR marketing type way, but just in a very factual, this is how this project is responding to the 6 carbon budget. So it's reducing carbon, but it's also producing a carbon capture strategy and developing a business case for carbon capture, great. It's, you know, the bottom bullet point here, it's creating low carbon heat, which is going to be supplied to a new housing development. So that creates an opportunity for all of those new houses to have low carbon heat from a sustainable source rather than burning methane or whatever it might be. So a number of different factors, you can see how the project is mirroring the 6 carbon budget pathways. And I just find that a very, very powerful way of looking at projects from a slightly different way, and to get some reassurance that projects are doing the right sort of things. And undoubtedly on lots of programs and projects, it'll raise some questions about, could we do a little bit more? You know, could we do something differently? Is there a business case for investing in something that's more aligned with the 6 carbon budget? Because it's new, 6 carbon budget only came out in December, so there will be a number of gaps, and there'll have to be sort of business cases put together about whether you can always fully align with them. Another idea would be a really simple one about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So can we map our project outcomes to the UN SDGs? It's, you know, they're presented as a very orderly set of boxes, and it suggests a degree of uniformity, but it's probably not the case. The reality is that each one of the SDGs is a collection of complex interrelated issues that you have to think about in different ways. But they're still very, very useful. This doesn't degrade their usefulness. We just need to approach them with our eyes open. So a few sort of examples of how you can think about mapping your projects against the SDGs. You can think about it from the stakeholders involved, and just be aware that stakeholders have different opportunities and different priorities. So this is just an example of designing, manufacturing, installing modular housing, for example. You know, a project leadership level, that the SDGs that are defining the successful outcomes of the project. Could be about good health and well-being, reduced inequality, sustainable cities, life on land. The manufacturers would be more focused on good education, gender equality, decent work and economic growth, and the designers maybe on clean energy, responsible consumption of materials, and climate action. So it's interesting also that the scale of the impact tends to be more in the project management, project leadership end of things. So we're looking at the more sort of holistic, broader planetary and society outcomes. And that's a really interesting thing for me in terms of reminding ourselves how influential we can be. But it's also good for clarifying that different stakeholders will have different drivers, and they might, one stakeholder might see the drivers of another as slightly irrelevant, or the timing might be different, so it can affect their buy-in. So mapping these out and understanding everyone's perspective is a really simple way of reframing your projects in a more interesting way. And actually, people often lose track of why they're doing their projects, what that overall vision and blueprint is, and just doing an exercise like this is a really interesting way of reminding people about what their project aspirations are. Ultimately, hopefully, this is a bit zen, but project managers can provide that clarity on their projects. So that's about it. Just as a reminder of some things that we can do as a profession. I'm really hoping that you can all get on board with the APM program of events, and really think about what events you can initiate and facilitate in your own project teams or your own project organisations. That's about it. We've got 2 quick Slido questions, which Rob Allen's going to take us through, and then time for 15 minutes worth of questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. So I've ensured that I've unmuted myself this time. So question number 1 is, what one thing would help you to factor sustainability in the management of your project? So again, this will be just a word cloud forming all the good answers you give. So knowledge has just popped in. So we'll give this a little bit longer to run, and I'll move on to the second question. So goals, clients, legislation, knowledge is becoming a key word so far.
This is it's often a good thing to think about in terms of what the blockers are as well, or what the perceived blockers are. Commonly, people will kind of look at their clients or their sponsors as being a bit of a blocker in terms of there not being enough pull. But there's a really interesting mix here, actually. So management buy-in, maybe it's a similar sort of thing. And I think there is a real opportunity now for some bottom-up influence. So there's some really good examples of almost kind of bottom-up rebellions from within some project management organisations who've demanded that their shareholders, their board, think a little bit differently in terms of the projects that they're getting involved with. So you are capable collectively to have a bit of a voice. And there's some technical ones in here, budgets, life cycle examples. And again, don't get too bogged down on, I don't understand carbon budgeting, so I can't make a start on this. There's some really good resources out there that would allow you to make a start on some of those sorts of things. And some of the high level aspirational commitments will get you 80% of the way there as well. Okay, that's a really rich word cloud there. Should we go on to the next one, Rob?
Yeah, no, certainly. So thank you everyone for getting involved so far. So the final question is, what one thing do you commit to doing to raise ambition on your projects in the build up to COP26? So this will be more, there we go. People are going to start using hashtags. Cool. Raise awareness is becoming a key point. Education. So I'll mention this now. Rob has kindly allowed us to record this webinar. So it'll be found on APM YouTube very soon. So feel free to share this with your colleagues as well and get the message out there.
Yeah, there's a few things in there about kind of raising awareness, which is great. And there's this interesting scenario I've been trying to push at Arup called project triage or sustainable development triage. And don't just treat this as something that's relevant to your new projects or things that you're thinking of doing. There's pretty much every project we do could really benefit from taking a step back and re-examining what it's trying to achieve. Quite often people change, projects go on for a number of years, and you kind of forget what the raison d'etre is to be working on them, and it is really kind of powerful reminder to people to sort of strip it back, and using something like the Sustainable Development Goals is a good way of doing it. That's great. Lots and lots of different commitments there. So I mean, I'd kind of challenge you all to try and remember what you've said in here, and actually kind of turn this into something, because it is also quite energizing. It does give you a sort of a sense of purpose, and like I say, we're all looking for a bit of a sense of purpose and a bit of different stimulus in terms of the energy that we bring to our daily lives at the moment. So that's great.
Excellent. Well, I'll keep this one running in the background, just to allow other people to add their aims for the future. So Rob, I'll pass back to you and your slide deck.
Yeah, this is going to be pretty quick. So that was something that hopefully just says thank you. Done the questions. Sorry, that's about it really. I'll leave that slide up there. Just as I'm hugely competitive, and it really annoys me that I've only got 43 signatories to Project Managers Declare. I'd really love to get up to 50 after today. So please feel free to go up there and sign up to Project Managers Declare and try and get us to the 50 bracket. So we've got something to celebrate this week. That would be great. But otherwise, yeah, really happy to take a few questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. Firstly, I'll cover the great comments. So people have said, thank you very much for taking the time to share with us. Really enjoyed today's presentation. So I'll dive into the questions. So the first one is from Peter. He says, Rob, you're using terms like ethical and moral. What would you define as the difference?
I've never really thought about it. I sort of I guess moral is a little bit less codified than ethical. Ethical tends to be hardwired into a set of these are our ethics. This is what unethical behavior is, and you might have a kind of a complaints policy for things that aren't ethical. Moral to me is a little bit sort of softer, and I might not get in trouble for project managing a massive carbon emitting project, and maybe I will even get celebrated if I do it particularly well. I'm just trying to kind of say that there is a slightly more ethereal moral component to is this the right thing to be doing, that I think we have some influence to kind of say this is our own moral line in the sand. So there's probably a far more profound academic response to the difference between moral and ethical that Google, I'm sure, would educate me on. But yeah, hopefully that was within my thinking.
Perfect. Well, thank you, and Peter, I hope that helps. I'll move on to the question from Matt, who says, he starts off with, Rob, great presentation, many thanks. And he asks, how would you suggest framing the message to influence direction drivers within digital transformation as opposed to construction, engineering, manufacturing focused deliveries?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. And I'm not an IT project manager, so but I would definitely, you've got to speak the language of your stakeholders a little bit, so you'll have a much better idea of the outcomes that you typically use on digital transformation projects. But I definitely would have a go at using the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, to kind of think from a project perspective, what are our desired outcomes, not our outputs, not our solutions, not our digital software outcomes, whatever it might be, but just think about the kind of the broader outcomes that we're trying to achieve. What are we trying to solve? And you should be able to map them in a meaningful way to the SDGs. And there's more than just 17 headings in the SDGs. If you go to the website, you'll see that each one of those 17 targets has got a whole load of, each one of those sort of 17 high-level topics has got a whole number of targets against them. So you'll be able to kind of map the ones that are most relevant to your project. But I'm really interested, is one of my own personal learnings is to understand more about how the IT community are addressing sustainable development in their work. It's not a field that I'm closely involved with. I know every single one of our projects is investing in digital transformation as a way of increasing the accuracy of the decisions that we're making, an element of automation so we can concentrate maybe on the sort of more creative elements of the work we do. So it's an absolute vital sort of cog in all of the projects that we work in. But I'm really interested to learn more about how people who say they're an IT project manager or they're involved purely in digital transformation in its own right are embracing the sustainable development goals.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And Matt, I hope that helps with your question. Rob, so I'll move on to the question from Rachel, who says, current net zero policies will not keep warming to within 1.5. What about a drive for carbon removal technology projects?
Yeah, I think this phrase net zero is growing, I wouldn't say increasingly controversial, but it's being challenged. And net zero is the reality that the Committee on Climate Change reached when they published their technical report in 2019, that the roadmap that they've set out does not achieve zero carbon emissions. It's sort of acknowledging that there's some offsets required, and those offsets can be by planting trees or they can be by carbon capture, and the technology around carbon capture is fairly immature at the moment, but there are some big projects going on in terms of trying to create an infrastructure for carbon capture. That energy from waste plant example, that they could put in the technology to allow carbon capture, but they need the infrastructure to be able to go and transport it to a meaningful place, and that's more in a consolidated type way. So yeah, the reality of the net zero roadmap is it's imperfect. It's not an absolute zero. So absolutely part of that offsetting is going to be more and more carbon capture through its sort of physical movement of carbon or the kind of the more technological chemical processes that absorb it in different ways. So absolutely it's up there with the highest priority in terms of how to go from net zero to absolute zero.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. I hope that answers the question there for you, Rachel. I can see the time. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky. We've got a couple more minutes left and just fire one more question at you, if that's okay, Rob. Steve has said, should we have sustainability as a high in the agenda as time, cost, quality? If so, how do we drive this change?
Short answer, yes. And it's where I've seen it work well. It's been something that's echoed from the top. So it's come down from the sort of the governance of the business cases, and it's difficult, to be honest, because you have to have, in a traditional organisation, you might have people who are still incentivised or paid to deliver bottom line outcomes that don't have any reflection on what their life cycle carbon ambitions might be. So you need to start aligning everything, and it's going to be a bit clunky for the next few years until all those things straighten themselves out, because you don't discover some of them until they present themselves as a bit of an obstacle. But yeah, that kind of that sustainable development or social value, whatever you want to be, that kind of broader sort of societal planetary set of requirements is already working its way into sort of the governance or the way we decide which projects are worth investing in. But yeah, yes is the short answer.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob and Steve. I hope that answers your question.
Rob, I can't see when you say I hope that answers your question. I imagine they're going, no, it doesn't.
No, Matt, who asked the question previously, said thank you very much for your response. And there's been lots of great questions as well. Lots of great comments saying thank you for the knowledge along the way.
That's so, Rob, short but sweet today, but hopefully it's given you a few ideas to follow up on.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. So it just really leaves me to say, Rob, thank you on behalf of the APM and everyone that's joined us today for taking the time out to present to us and also answer the questions along the way. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Go out there and do amazing things, everyone.
Remember your commitments that you made on the final Slido question. And I also hope you hit your 50 in the very near future. Everyone, thank you for joining us today and for firing through the questions to Rob, but also joining in the Slido and the interaction along the way. We hope you keep well, and we hope to see you at future APM webinars. Bye for now.
Thanks for your support, Rob, as well.